Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It's 7 o'clock. I've got an echo already. Right, again. Thank you. Technology is working. Welcome to this evening's meeting of the Planning Committee of Woking Borough Council on the 8th of November. I'm Councillor David Cornish and I will chair the meeting. The Planning Committee consists of 9 elected borough councillors supported by a variety of professional officers. This is not a political meeting, but a quasi-judicial committee which forms part of the planning process. As such, it has formal set procedures which must be adhered to. Firstly, the planning officer will present an application, and then only those speakers who have registered to speak will be invited to address the committee. There is a strict time limit of 3 minutes per category of speaker, those categories being town and parish councils, objectors, supporters, and those borough members affected by the application. Members of the committee are more impressed by the quality of what you say rather than how long you speak for, but above all, please do stay within your time limit. Everyone has had the opportunity to comment upon each application through the consultation process, and no one else, including borough councillors, town and parish councillors, agents, applicants, objectors or supporters are permitted to address the committee, ask questions or in any way disrupt the meeting. Following the speakers, members of the committee will discuss and debate each application and seek clarification from the council's professional planning officers in order to reach a decision. The decision reached by the committee may or may not agree with that recommended by the presenting case officer. It is important to understand that the committee can only determine the actual planning applications presented before it using current national and local planning policies and relevant decisions of the relevant planning inspectorate. We cannot consider whether or not they are a good idea, whether they are needed, whether they are too costly, whether there are alternative uses of the site or more suitable uses of the land elsewhere, or whether or not they are popular. Unfortunately, none of these issues are considered as material planning considerations that can form the basis of our decisions. Finally, this is a hybrid meeting with committee members present in the room, while some officers are attending the meeting in person and some connecting via Microsoft Teams. The meeting is being live streamed on YouTube. If you are joining us remotely, please ensure that your camera is switched on only when you are speaking and that your microphone is unmuted only when you are speaking. Thank you. Right, agenda item 38, apologies. Madeline?
Councillor Stone, Councillor Shepherd-Payne, Councillor Munro.
Okay, thank you. Minutes of the previous meeting, to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 11th of October. Does anybody have any questions or queries about those minutes in terms of accuracy? No? Can I have someone to nominate that we accept them? Thank you. The minutes of the meeting are approved. Declarations of interest. Anybody other than me? Okay, I must declare a prejudicial interest in agenda item 44, which is application 231643. I am known to one of the speakers who will speak in against this application. It's someone I regard as a colleague and as a friend on Finch Hampstead Parish Council. And for that reason, I will withdraw from the meeting when we reach that agenda item. Councillor Andrew Mickleborough will chair the meeting and I will re-enter the meeting once that item has been decided upon. Madeline, if you can make sure that follows through, that'd be great. Thank you. Okay, item 42, which is application 223083, land south of Bridge Farm, Reading Road, Arborfield. That is Sarah. Thank you.
Right, application 223083. This is an outline application for the erection of 11 commercial units to provide 6966 square metres gross internal area for commercial and employment development, predominantly within B8 and or Class EG uses, with supporting facilities within Class E using uses comprising ancillary offices, trade counters and food and drink facilities with highway works and strategic landscaping. This is an outline application and the only matters that can be considered today are access, siting and scale. This is the application site, and it is, see my cursor, it's south of Bridge Farm. Bridge Farm is here. Here is the application site. Observer Way is to the west, down here. Woodland to the east. This is ancient woodland. It's also protected by tree preservation order. And the road here, Greensward Lane, for residential development. This is an overview aerial image showing the location, and to the west where we have fields to the north here. It is a countryside location. The application site, as I said, sits south of Bridge Farm. That's the clip and climb building here. Maximum height 9.6 metres here. Existing Bridge Farm, application site, Observer Way. This is an indicative master plan, or a plan of the site. 11 units here. This landscaping and layout, the layout is covered here today. The actual landscaping of the site, the details within the site are subject to reserve matters. I don't know how much you can see of this site here, but we have a wooded area and a protected open space here. Okay, moving on. These are illustrative visuals. Appearance of the buildings are subject to reserve matters. So again, with the landscaping to be reserved later. So these are indicative. They're not what the actual proposal is at the moment. The details will be covered by reserve matters. Okay. So the recommendation is for approval. It's subject to conditions and a legal agreement, which is yet to be finalised. There are updates on the supplementary agenda, and which sets out where there are just clarification within the report and amendments. There is also a typo at paragraph 21 where it refers to paragraph 84 of the NPPF, and it should be 85. And condition 1 should only refer to the reserve matters being landscape and appearance. So there's a change in the wording there for condition 1. Okay. So the update on the agenda, the supplementary update, details amendments to the report, the status of the current local plan, status of the ancient woodland, the additional condition regarding foul water drainage, distances between the buildings and the distances of the woodland. And where you'll see there on page 3 of the supplementary agenda is that the distances, we have a 15-metre buffer between the proposed buildings and what would be the woodland. The woodland is 31 metres to the back of, or to Greenswood Lane, and then we've got 60 metres between the rear boundaries and the rear of the proposed buildings. But again, you've got the additional there with the rear of approximately 10 metres to the rear of the actual dwellings themselves. windows. Okay. So as I say, the scheme is subject to recommended for approval, subject to conditions. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah, thank you. I should note for the minutes that a site visit was conducted a week ago, and all members of the planning committee attended, with the exceptions of Councillor Munro and Councillor Shepherd-Dubay. Okay, thank you. We have three speakers for and against this, or a combination of for and against this application. The first I have on my list is Vanessa Starkey on behalf of Arborfield and Newland Parish Council. Vanessa, are you with us online?
Yes, I'm here. Yeah,
okay.
Thank you very much.
Vanessa, you have 3 minutes, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So just to say, Arborfield and Newland Parish Council object to this planning application in the strongest terms. The reasons being the scale and the location of the industrial units would cause change to a rural setting next to an ancient woodland, Pound Copse. The Parish Council does not believe that the mitigations put in place by the applicant can offset the harm done. The siting of the industrial units on the site of the ancient woodland will have a detrimental effect on the wildlife due to the light, noise and pollution. There's no demonstrable benefit to having these units here. There are already a number of small and medium-sized industrial estates in close proximity, and a number of these already have vacancies, such as Hogwood Industrial Estate and Bound Oak Industrial Estate. There's also, regarding the neighbourhood plan, that this development contravenes policies stated in the neighbourhood plan on a number of issues. So Arborfield Newland objects to this proposal of a commercial development on what is a greenfield site that is situated on a green route enhancement area. Thank you.
Vanessa, thank you, and thank you for being so concise. I'd next like to ask James Good, who I think is in the room, to speak on behalf of the applicant. Thank you. And James, you also have 3 minutes.
Good evening. My name is James Good, and I am a director of Angle Property and joint applicant with the Farley Farms Partnership for this application. We've worked positively with your planning team over the course of the last 12 months to submit a deliverable and flexible scheme that will suit the needs of modern businesses, as shown on the planning drawings before you this evening. I would point you to particularly the parameter plan, which shows the building locations which are fixed and also provides a fixed height for the development so that there is certainty over that aspect. This site has been cut off from the wider agricultural estate by the new Observer Way relief road and was used as the contractor compound during its construction. It no longer feels like open countryside. It is one of only 2 sites identified by the council in the borough as suitable for employment use in the recent housing and employment land assessments. The development will be located adjacent to the established commercial Bridge Farm estate and benefits from existing bus services and good transport links. In addition, a new connection will be made to the existing cycleway footpath along Observer Way. This is a sustainable and well-located development. The ancient woodland to the east of the site and public footpath are unaffected, and a new amenity area at the southern end of the site will be created for the wider community. We've made every effort to include extensive landscaping proposals, which will be considered at a further application stage to minimise the visual impact of the development over time and enhance biodiversity by around 20%. The buildings will be constructed to secure the highest level of energy efficiency, including solar panels, and minimise carbon emissions. From our initial marketing campaign, we know there is significant demand for this type of development from local occupiers, which supports the council's own research. This scheme, if approved, will allow local companies to grow, create jobs, and bring economic benefits to the borough. Your officers have written a well-balanced, thorough report, and we respectfully ask the committee to support the officer's recommendation for approval. Thank you.
James, thank you, and thank you again for keeping within the time limits. Thirdly, we have Councillor Gary Cowan, who's the ward member. And Gary, I think you're with us online.
Yes, I am somewhere. Can you see me?
No, we can certainly hear you.
Yeah, that's strange. Oh dear. I'm sorry about that. I'll carry on without.
Carry on with audio is absolutely fine, Gary. You've got 3 minutes.
Okay. The MPPF core strategy and MBD all seek to restrict development outside development limits, and it does not encourage countryside development, particularly on its best and most virtual land, whatever the size. The need for B8 forced place is not evidenced, and the fact that Bound Oak has 4,200 square metres of B2, B8 and E class and is currently empty up for sale, also in Arborfield. There are vacancies at Holwood Industrial Estate and Lambs Lane. You've got to understand that Class B8 and E site benefits from permitted development rights to change their use without any need for planning permission. So the movement from greenfield to brownfield door will now be opened by this planning application. Class E allows for industrial processes, provided there's no detriment to the amenity of the area by virtue of noise, vibration, smell, etc. The residential properties in Greenfield Lane will suffer, but more importantly, it will also damage the residential properties in Bridge Farm itself, which the officer report fails to mention. Pound Copse is an ancient woodland, and it will have a serious detrimental effect on the wildlife that lives there, especially as B8 and B and E classes allow for outside storage, lighting and vehicle movements, resulting in light, particulate and noise pollution. The case officer mentioned 15 metres, but the NPPF paragraph 180 says a minimum of 15 metres. Natural England, the NPPF and the Forestry Commission all state that development resulting in the loss or deterioration of irreplaceable habitats such as ancient woodland and veteran trees should be refused. The Council's own ecological report seeks to protect light-sensitive species and is concerned about the light spill into the ancient woodland. They're also concerned about biodiversity net gain, which has not been established and says so in the report. The council officers agree a spatial conflict with the local plan that harm will be caused to the landscape, and it adds that it is not clear how new planting will reduce the impact of noise and movement on the village of Arborfield. The council's landscape officer does not agree how the setting of settlements relates to a village character, as the site is a rural agricultural landscape, and as the report does not consider the site and surrounding landscape has the capacity to accommodate the proposal without harm.
Gary, you've had your 3 minutes. Can I ask you to sum up in one sentence, please?
One very simple sentence. The MPPF encourages or discourages development in the countryside. It does allow for flexibility, and I would interpret that to mean the interpretation is that if, for example, someone in the northeast or north.
Gary, I'm sorry that you've now had something in excess of your 3 minutes. So I'm going to have to ask you to stop there with respect to all our other speakers as well. But thank you very much for your input.
Thank you.
Yeah. Members of the committee, I've got Andrew, Michael. Anybody else wish to raise a question at this point? Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. The report argues that if permission is granted, this development could generate significant employment on a site adjacent to the existing Bridge Farm commercial site, but also acknowledges a number of conflicts in regard to aspects of national and local policies. It would seem to me that the committee's task is to reach an informed decision on the level of harms that would likely result if planning permission was granted, mindful of the local and national policies that could be impacted. And to this end, I have quite a number of questions. I'll begin with the first three questions, if I may. So the first question relates to the settlement boundaries. It is stated that the application site lies outside the settlement limits and is within the countryside. Would it be possible for officers to show, perhaps on the aerial photograph, where the settlement boundaries lie in relation to this site? Secondly, can officers please clarify whether local and national planning policies, including neighbourhood plans, are statements of wider principles or inviolable rules that must be applied to all localities? And linked to this, the Barkham Neighbourhood Plan is described on page 31 as holding full weight in the decision-making process. Could officers please elaborate what criteria would need to be satisfied if the committee was to seek to grant planning permission, if it was the case that this conflicts with the neighbourhood plan? And my third question for the moment, okay, is what is the purpose of designating core employment areas? Thank you.
Andrew, thank you. Do you want to come back on that, or is that Sarah?
Yeah, thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Chair. It may be useful to bring up an aerial of the settlement boundaries, if I can get it up in a reasonable time. If I can't, I might move on to the other questions. And I will just share my screen. Is that on? Yes. There we go. Apologies for the delay there. My mouse decided not to respond. On the screen now, you'll see the Arborfield Garrison SDL site to the south. You'll see the Arborfield Cross. You'll see Observer Way. It's not the clearest because there's an overlay there. The application site is there. To the northeast, you've obviously got the settlement of Shinfield, which is outlined in blue, and further around to Rice Green. I will just overlay the live planning applications, and it should, if it's working, give us the application site. There we go. So that's where it is spatially in relation to nearby settlements. Obviously, that is not taking into account existing development in the form of Bridge Farm, houses along Reading Road, and the road Greenswells Lane to the east. So that's, Andrew, hopefully the first question clarified.
Is it possible for us to see where the settlement boundaries, and I mean, I'm assuming that the settlement boundaries are actually defined, you know, in some.
Yeah, that's what's on the screen there in terms of the blue. The blue is the settlements, and the purple, you can see the.
Oh, look.
If I zoom out a bit further, maybe it will allow me to. Probably doesn't.
What was the yellow area on that?
That would be, I believe it's a limited development location. There's a moderate development location and a major development location. So that's the spatial context. Sorry, it's quite a busy map, and if I click, yeah, everything in green is countryside.
So if I just be clarity for everyone's sake, this is.
That's correct. I will stop sharing my screen now because it may crash my computer. On the second point, Andrew, and just make sure I get this correct, is the policy, the neighbourhood plan policy requirements and that of the local plan. The starting point for any application is is an assessment against the development plan as required by 38(6) of the Town and Country Planning Act. And in determining any application, the local plan, the development plan, which in this case consists of a suite of documents, the core strategy, the MDD, and obviously the neighbourhood plan, is the starting point. Where there is conflict, as often is with many varying development proposals, Section 38(6) of the Town and Country Planning Act requires due regard to be had to any other material planning considerations after considering the development plan as the starting point. Unfortunately, to apply a test of policy compliance does not conclude the exercise planners need to undertake. They need to consider first whether there is conflict or compliance, and to what level that conflict and compliance is. Is it a major fundamental conflict? Are there policies within the local plan in which there is partial compliance, full compliance, or no compliance? And then are there any other material planning considerations which would outweigh any of those identified conflicts? That's the exercise the plan has gone through in this particular case. It's quite a complex application. It does present the committee with a number of quite clear conflicts, but also a number of quite clear benefits, along with compliance with other relevant policies to do with ecology, to do with transport, and the fact that certain matters are reserved for a later stage. What we have in front of us is obviously a proposal which is outside a settlement. This committee is not a stranger to those type of proposals, and rarely do they, as a starting point, comply with the spatial strategy, which we know obviously has quite a strong objective of limiting development to settlements. I think that was the second question. The final question was core employment areas, if I get that correct. Core employment areas are those areas in which the local authority wish to support, focus, and consolidate economic development. This does not exclude or preclude economic development elsewhere if it is appropriate and complies with the wider design, transport, landscape, environmental policies of the plan. There is no requirement within the local plan to consider, for example, alternative sites through either marketing or vacancy rates. There isn't a needs test to do with economic development. It's not a supermarket which would need to go through a sequential test for where its location would be more appropriate. It is a speculative development we're presented with, and the requirement is for us to balance all the different facets of the development plan along with any benefits that may bring.
Yeah, finish your top, Andrew, and I'll go to Michael, and then we'll go around the table.
Thank you, Brian. That's really helpful. I'll take another 3 questions, if that's okay. Firstly, I appreciate that the status of the site in terms of the local plan update carries very little weight. However, on page 32, it's stated that the site was promoted for inclusion in the local plan update, but has not been included. Are there any reasons for its non-inclusion that are relevant to this application? Secondly, it appears that the location of the site next to a site with existing commercial use is considered a material planning consideration. That's stated on page 36. So my question really alludes to potential concerns regarding precedent, including that if this application was granted, it might enable further development creep. I know any further applications, future applications, would need to be considered on their own merit. But my specific question is, could granting permission on the basis of its location next to an existing commercial site potentially be used as a material factor in any future further applications? And thirdly, I note the landscape officer's objections that the development could not be achieved, even with soft landscaping, without harming the local landscape character and views from the public right-of-way. There are references, including from the Parish Council, to the site being within a green route enhancement area. Could officers please elaborate and state what status the green route enhancement area might have in planning terms? Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. So let me make sure I get the first question right. Would be the relating to the status of the site within the local plan update, and the fact that the local plan update at this stage is given little weight. The site, as you correctly state, has not been included. However, it was considered, and it was considered potentially suitable within the HELA. That was for employment development. The HELA doesn't determine or identify individual sites or development proposals. It considers them in a broad pool of sites available for development to meet the borough's needs into the future. The proposal in front of us is not specifically considered as part of the HELA. However, this app now requires us to consider, unlike the HELA, we are now required to consider whether this site is appropriate for its intended purpose, separate from the HELA. That's probably as far as officers can go in confirming its status. It doesn't have any more or less weight in terms of the harm caused. However, exercises like the HELA and employment lands assessments are useful indicators to the appropriateness of a site. If obviously sites are included, then we wouldn't probably be having the conversation, because it would be included within one of those documents. The fact that it's not included doesn't make it any less or more acceptable if the nature of what's being proposed in front of us takes into account sensitive receptors, landscape, external appearance, highways matters. It is a useful indicator to whether a site would at first glance be considered appropriate to meet borough-wide needs. And that's probably as far as I can go on that. And that includes the employment land review, which also considered it in terms of meeting borough-wide needs. The next question was regarding development creep, I believe, and precedent. You rightly say that each application will be considered on its own merits. The individual site-specific circumstances and the context of the site is very important in this case. Again, that feeds into possibly the background as why it would be potentially suitable at an early study stage. The proposal in front of us is unlikely to be replicated anywhere else beyond Observer Way or to the east of the woodland, because there are a number of physical and man-made interventions which would fundamentally limit and visually enclose the site. And so to say whether it would open up other sites or allow precedent would be probably quite difficult for officers to say it would, naturally, because the application in front of us is deemed appropriate by the way it is enclosed and visually limited from our perspective. The final question was about the green route enhancement area and the landscape objectives of that. The Observer Way development is accompanied by structural landscaping, which I think members would have seen from site visit has not been fully matured, and the site itself, along with the verges and the perimeter of infrastructure like Observer Way, will visually be very different in 5, 10, 15 years time. The objective of the council along transport corridors, along areas where there is natural features like the ancient woodland, is to ensure that those routes are enhanced, environmentally enhanced. It's officers' view that this wouldn't necessarily conflict with any of those requirements, and if a passerby was crossing Observer Way in 10 or 15, the site would be well accommodated within existing structural landscaping, irrespective of whether development came forward. It would be a very different environment. I think that's probably Yeah, hopefully that answers your questions.
Just a very quick point of clarification. So the green route enhancement area refers to land along the roadways, does it? Principally? Or is it the whole of the site?
It's the route. It's not the whole of this application site.
Yeah, thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Chairman. I did actually value going to the site meeting. I find it extremely useful. When we went there, it was the field was sodden. It was not very pleasant to say at least trying to walk through it. But I like to refer to page 41 of the agenda. And then it's numbers 126 and 127 under flooding and drainage. I just really want officers to explain how the flooding issue could be alleviated. A little bit more detail on that would be great. And just referring back to 127, a little bit confusing when you try and read this because it doesn't make a lot of sense. But it's one where it says the council's drainage officer is satisfied with the information provided and raises, and I'm sure that's meant to be no, but it's on. So it kind of doesn't make a lot of sense. That's why I'm asking the question, I think, as well as when we were there as well, because it was, yeah, I think I found another one on the second committee running actually, but this one's quite important. So I just want a bit more information on that. Thank you.
Let's start with 127 then. There is no objections. The drainage officer has assessed the information that's before them. So in terms of looking at the strategy, that is something that could be dealt with as part of the reserve matter stage. It's conditioned now, but dealt with separately. So it's the details are considered in terms of how it addresses are dealt with via the roads, dealt with how any surface water runoff as well as foul, and we've added another condition regarding foul as well. So our drainage officers will be commenting on surface water runoff. Foul is with Thames Water or the Water Authority in that sense. So we have no objections at all. It's in flood zone 1, as in it's not going to at risk of flooding from rivers. The Environment Agency has not raised any objection either.
Can I just go back on that? I mean, when we did visit it, we walked along that paved pathway and there was water on the top of it going into the ditch beside Observer Way. Is there anything going to be alleviate? Because I'm thinking when it's going to be frosty weather, if somebody's walking over that could be absolutely lethal.
I'll try and answer. I'm not a drainage expert, but any fields you see, gone are the days that the owner would go and clear ditches under his own drainage. When we come to look at development, every development, where it's housing, employment, has to have its own drainage strategy to ensure that the proposed development can drain without leading to any increase in flooding. And a lot of the times you see, you go along a country road and there's flooding. A lot of that is runoff from fields that doesn't have proper drainage within the field that the farmers used to do in the olden days, by digging channels and stuff like that. So with development, with the conditions we've got, they have to provide acceptable drainage on site that will alleviate any chance of flooding going off the site onto footways and roads.
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually asking this question because my background is insurance and flooding is a huge issue and lots of insurers will exclude it and are excluding it more, and it makes the job of insurance broking incredibly difficult. But I just, could I make one plea? Before these agendas are sent out, they be checked carefully? So I think when you get on and no, it might be a simple thing, but it does have a huge impact on how you read this, and it might alleviate a lot of questions going on forward. Thank you.
Michael, noted. Any further questions, Tony? Al?
Yeah, just to ask about the HGVs, the access to the site. There's nothing that's going to stop HGVs going up through Arborfield Village in this plan, is there? I mean, if it's expanded like this, you know, Rat runs down Church Road, Mole Road, up to Willish. Is that should there be some sort of constraint?
When I looked at this assessment, the idea was that because of Observer Way, that the vehicles would access the site from Observer Way or the A327 Eastern Relief Road M4, and from the south coming up A327 onto Observer Way, which would be the easiest way of doing it. One way of we could be looking at, because the access is already there anyway now. It's not a new access. The vehicles are going in there. But with all the traffic management that's been put in Observer Way, it's not attractive for lorries to go up Everleigh Road and turn left or coming down from Wokingham. So the attractive route would be, and the strategic route would be, Observer Way, either from the south, because you've got the M3 coming up, or from M4 down the Eastern Relief Road, along Reading Road, and come in from the roundabout.
Thank you. And just a question about let's talk about walking and cycling. There's no, I mean, and I wouldn't expect, you know, this site to build the route to from Shinfield, a route from Shinfield to Arborfield. It'll obviously be expensive, but there's no provision here for them to actually put any contribution into building that, which I think is a council plan.
That would be my understanding. I'm not an expert on the fact. It's covered by the SIL regulations that goes into the infrastructure, so that the lessons, because it, you know, if for example there was a contribution, but that contribution would only be a certain amount, there's no risk. There's a risk that will never be used to do it, and therefore within the SIL regulations. And the old 1, 2, 3 list, if it's still valid, has a list of infrastructures and things like that, and walking and cycling improvements are part of that. So the development is paying indirectly to the SIL rather than a contribution.
I'll ask a few questions myself and I'll give Andrew another go. I find myself very conflicted by this application because it is quite normal, or more often the case, that applications come before this committee where you look at it for the first time and intuitively feel this is a bad idea to build whatever it might be here, but there's a raft of policies telling us that we should. But here we have a location which is effectively extension to an existing business park, which feels like quite a good idea, but there's a raft of policies telling us that we shouldn't. And that is quite unusual in my experience. We're being asked to set aside a number of WBC core policies, particularly about development of the countryside and a number of others, and 3 or 4 policies from the Barkham and Arborfield neighbourhood plan, which carries full weight in the planning assessments. I'm not entirely clear still what the driving force is that requires us to set aside all of those policy requirements to approve this site. The only one that stands out to me is comments, I think in paragraph 29, about the employment land review states there's a need in a borough, but that wasn't reflected in any of the recent local plan or local plan updates because this site hasn't come forward for those. So I do stand very confused as to that, and any clarity you can add on that would be really helpful. I'd like to specifically to understand your assessment of the policies in the neighbourhood plan that seem to speak against this development and why you think that wouldn't be the case. And on a specific one, I note the Landscape and Trees Officer recommended refusal of the application, presumably because of the proximity to the ancient woodland. Was that refusal made before the conditions that have been described were in place or suggested, or does that recommendation to refuse still stand?
Thank you, Chair. I might answer that last question first in terms of landscape objection. Each consultee comments specifically on their professional discipline. And obviously in context to landscape, we would be best placed to seek advice from our landscape and tree colleagues in our natural environment team. The objection is based on the level of harm to the landscape, not specifically the ancient woodland. Moreover, as it was concluded, I believe it was a kind of, there's actually, let me just get I think it was a limited, bear with me a second. And the moderately adverse effects to certain views and proximity to the site, and that's mainly from the southwest and the west. The consultees provide their professional input, and it is the responsibility and an unenviable task of officers to weigh that up with other requirements, not only of the local plan, but also wider material considerations and those dictated to by the NPPF, which provides overarching objectives for how development should be considered. That kind of brings us on to your first point about.
So
no
just to be clear, the conditions that are proposed as part of this application do not change the view of the trees and landscape officers that the application should be refused.
So that's correct. So the conditions proposed are there because they meet the tests of the PPG, and they make what would otherwise be unacceptable development acceptable. Without any of the conditions listed, this scheme would not be acceptable. Everything from sort of construction management to biodiversity to energy efficiency. The scheme would not be here with the same recommendation if we did not have the ability to impose those conditions. The first point, the first question about conflicting with relevant neighbourhood plan and local plan policies is noted, and officers have been very upfront and need to be very upfront with the committee that there is conflict. Rarely isn't there in development, but also there is a wider overarching, as I mentioned just then, there's the overarching objectives of the NPPF, which need to be held, need to have due regard given to, which includes, and it's referenced in paragraph 19. The NPPF paragraph 81 states that significant weight should be placed on the need to support economic growth and productivity, taking into account both local business needs and wider opportunities for development. That's quite a strongly and positively worded requirement of the NPPF, which officers need to have due regard to. It doesn't trump everything. No one matter does in planning. But also the NPPF goes on to acknowledge, unlike more specific neighbourhood and local plans, that there will be times that such development will need to be provided or could be provided outside or adjoining settlements. It recognises that existing built-up areas don't stay the same forever, and there may be exceptions where the needs or the benefits outweigh the identified harm. And this is one of those examples, and it's not a clear-cut recommendation. It is an on-balance recommendation, taking into account everything, that officers believe that those benefits of the scheme outweigh the identified harm. Now, that identified harm primarily, as detailed in quite a comprehensive landscape section, that consists of the harm to views in the short and medium term. The report, the landscape visual impact assessment, the comments from the landscape officer acknowledge that over time, as with structural landscaping on Observer Way, this site will be accommodated and further integrated in future. So nothing is stuck in a point in time. Officers have to acknowledge the fact that in 10 years' time, crossing the public right of way nearby possibly will look very different to than what it does now, which is quite stark and open. Hopefully that answers 2 questions. I'm not sure if there was a third.
Yeah, the third was the specific comment from Arborfield and Barton District Parish Council and their neighbourhood plan, and they raised objections on a number of points there. I'd just like your comment on the strength of those objections.
The neighbourhood plan is given full weight. It has the same weight as any other development plan document. We don't give less weight to any policies. We would say, and as we've acknowledged, there is a conflict, a spatial conflict, but the Arborfield Newlands neighbourhood plan is not going to naturally be as specific in anticipating speculative development. Again, that's only really possible where a site has been allocated specifically for what you are considering. In this case, no plan, local, national, or neighbourhood, has anticipated the exact development we're seeing here. So therefore, we must consider it against a wider suite of policies seeking environmental, social and economic benefits.
Okay. Well, you're waiting to go, then come back to you, Andrew.
Right. How far do we go when we're looking at need and the requirements of a planning application? So there's been a lot of talk this evening of sites at Hogwood, Bound Oak, Lambs Lane and Swallowfield. Contrary to what I've heard, other areas in the borough are full and don't have any vacancies. So I just want to get an understanding of how far do we test this statement or statements that there are lots of sites, with vacancies. So that's the first question. Something in my mind, Brian and Sarah, is telling me we don't have to do that. Because in the world of economics, why would you build it if you couldn't rent it? So, but I'll just test the question first.
Thanks, Wayne. Yeah, you are correct. Ultimately, what we can't necessarily talk about and consider here in any policy is the free market. But putting that aside, identified need normally is only a requirement where there is a policy that requires the particular use or the loss of a particular use to be considered. So, for example, loss of a valued community asset, a pub, there will normally be a requirement in the local plan to consider whether such a facility is needed. In terms of economic development being proposed, most local plans acknowledge there is a general need over a plan period. That is normally supplemented by annual or half-decade reviews into employment land, and as we've described tonight, things like the employment land needs review by Stantec 2023 and HELA and so on, which will undertake a study of what the level of need is at that period in time. And all the studies that we can rely upon generally point to a favourable picture in this part of the world, that purpose-built, high-quality commercial development is in demand. This part of the borough has a lot of new development, whether it was in the form of the SDL or Arborfield Studios, Shinfield Studios, beg your pardon, and so on. Things are constantly evolving, and so policies themselves are probably not as responsive as maybe recent studies, which say there is a continued need, and there is no requirement for a local authority to consider whether, for example, an alternative industrial estate, the other side of the borough, which has vacancies or is being lost to other development, makes this development more or less acceptable. So I know Towetley's been talked about, with the loss of industrial units elsewhere. That is assessed purely in the basis of what is being proposed there. But in the grand scheme, the need remains.
So thanks. When you look at the site, we talk about it being the best farming land available, but we've created a problem here by Observer Way, because it probably was a fantastic place to farm, but we've put a road all the way through it, and we use this very site as a compound. What's interesting, when you showed I call them the village envelopes, the settlement boundaries, etc., it's how you don't take the relationship of a new road when you redraw your settlement boundaries. So you've got the original Arborfield, you've now got the new SDL, you've got a very large road going all the way through it, and you almost create new settlements as you build a road. Now that site, to me, and as Michael said, it was very good going on the site visit, because you've almost landlocked it, because you can only get in one way. You've cornered it at the other end, and it's not that big for farming. So I think we've created a bit of a problem in putting a new road in there, but we had to, because obviously the new development. But that was just a statement. Going back to the other points, and I absolutely agree with David. This is so finely balanced, and it's one of those that's, put in the hands of a committee where you've got lots of things for it, lots of things against it. All the time and effort that's put into neighbourhood plans. I think most of the time that, although they carry a lot of weight, or they carry maximum weight, I tend to disagree with that. But going back to the landscape officer, if we just take the visuals away, there was no issue, just a question, with the proximity to the copse. It meets that test. It's just about the visuals. Am I right?
I think the main concern was the visual impact on the character. They said that it would become how it moves from urban or from rural to urban. It was that, how you put that into context, and then the concern was how any landscape, how the site would change over the years. So that was again the main concern. Also, if you look at page 44, where you've got the landscape strategies, they've looked at the two areas, but also it says that the aim is to integrate new development. And that's the key thing here, where you've got actually an opportunity to integrate this scheme, where you have a need, an employment, a business need for the uses, but also the opportunity to integrate this new development with new buildings. And that's the key thing with the landscape strategy, has to integrate. And that's the aim, really. So you're conserving and enhancing, but you're also integrating. And that's where you get the reserve matters comes into play. So we're not determining landscape today. We're dealing with how a scheme such as this could be integrated into a site that is now contained by the road and woodland.
Thank you. Can I come back to a question that Al had to you, Gordon? Can we, if we were minded to approve it, could we put an informative on with regards to HGVs? Because I understand, and we witnessed it on the day, that you come to the entrance, why they would want to turn right, I've got no idea, because they've got to go through all those chicanes. but people don't necessarily know where they're going because they follow sat navs. Could we put an informative on so that we say HGVs must turn left? And you see this on sites, don't you? So that you could stop that traffic from going through the village, as was described, and you go straight back, left, and then on to Observer Way.
So it's worth, it's just, yeah, Wayne, that was an interesting question because we looked at that ourselves in terms of the logical desire routes from this site out west and east along the M4, and every single route, whether you're going to Slough or you're going to Newbury, will take you out to the main junction on the M4, Blackboy roundabout, and up to Medace, and junction 11, beg your pardon. None of them take you the opposite direction. It doesn't matter which way you're coming. If you're coming from the south, obviously, Basingstoke Way, you'd be coming up the A33 and you'd come across. So the kind of anecdotal assessment of how this site works, if you are set at different pins in different directions, takes you in the same way. But to answer the question, which condition, sorry, it was number 14 as a travel plan. There's a number of, do you want to jump?
Yeah, there's a number of conditions that deal with the construction phase, and also dealing with the ecological enhancements as well, but how we accommodation of construction vehicles, that side of it. There's a travel plan that deals with alternative forms of transport as well. So it with cycle links as well. So in terms of controlling how HGVs enter or exit the site, we've got an existing site already where they could be doing that already. It's off the same access road. And do you want to chip in?
I know there's an example down in, I'm going to get the name wrong, Church Road down in 3 Mile Cross, is it? Church Road, there is a distributor site down there, and they do have a banned left turn because there's a bridge limitation further. I think it's Church Lane. There's possibilities that, yes, as part of definitely as part of the construction management plan, we can set the routings. It's whether the developer himself would be willing to put up a banned right turn for HGVs. It's all possible. But it would be a voluntary one because it couldn't be policed.
Yeah, just to jump on the back of what Gordon said, it is something that is normally controlled and able to be enforced as part of construction. But in terms of operation, very rarely, unless there is a major physical constraint and you have HGVs getting stuck in roads, can planning control that. And even when planning tries to control it, as you know from other sites we've dealt with here, HGV drivers end up going wrong, even if there's restrictions and conditions in place. We as a local authority can't enforce that, and it's very difficult to monitor. It's quite an additional resource that we're not able to fulfil.
That this village has got at the moment, they've got HGVs coming from everywhere because of the development that's going on. And if it was to be approved, anything to minimise that, because when we were there, you've only got to drive through it. You've got narrow sections as you drive through Arborfield. I can imagine it must be a nightmare for anybody living there.
Okay, Wayne, thanks. Andrew, you have another question or two?
Yes, thank you, David. My question is about ecological impacts. A number of potential ecological impacts have been raised in the report and in some of the discussion tonight. I do see condition 9, which is there to try to mitigate some of these impacts. The site, of course, is located adjacent to ancient woodland. But my question is, and currently comprises, an area of grassland, and my question, really revolves around what sort of certainty is there that these ecological impacts can in fact be mitigated? And in order to answer that, I think the sort of evidence that we would require, would include ecological surveys, of the existing sites, what sort of species, already inhabit the sites, how far, for example, some of them, might be foraging out onto the grassland and beyond the grassland and so forth. So my question really is, can we be certain, that effective mitigation is possible? And if we're not certain, can we actually include a condition, that requires mitigation, if we don't have the evidence, to say that this is in fact possible?
The applicant has, the applicant submitted ecological impact assessment initially, okay, which would have covered surveys and the species found on site, including its flora and fauna, okay. So our consultee, our ecologist, has accepted that information. They've raised no objection to that. So they are confident that this scheme can be mitigated. Condition, information coming in, additional information. We've got several conditions that control, that deal with ecology during the construction phase. We've got environmental management plans, as well as enhancements. Just find condition numbers. You've got the construction environment management plan. We've got, so that's 8. We've got condition 9, which deals with enhancements and the implementation of any agreed mitigation that can be addressed, and our consultant is confident it can be done. You've also got the landscape and ecological management plan at condition 21 as well, and external lighting, which also can protect that too. So throughout the construction phase and after, we could say that the ecology is and species are protected.
It's just worth pointing out on a couple of those conditions, members should note the different requirements that are listed. So, for example, condition 21, the landscape and ecological management plan, there's A to G setting out the different requirements, which are, as members will see, they're quite detailed, and they can require a developer to provide quite a substantial amount of information to address them.
Officers, thank you. We've given this a thoroughly good hearing. Are there any final questions from any members of the committee? Okay, in which case I think we've reached the point of decision. So I'm going to ask if a member of the committee would like to propose that we approve this application. Sorry, I'll hold back.
Sorry, Chair, can I just add something? There's 2 points that, as you were discussing, I've been looking into in a bit more detail, and I just wanted to make sure members were aware of them before we proceeded any further. The first one was the green route. the green enhancement route that was discussed, that runs along Reading Road to the north and not down Observer Way. So it doesn't extend south past the site. It's to the north along Reading Road. That was the first thing. The second one was the sill requirements on the borough's sill requirements do not list this type of development as requiring sill, except where it's retail development, which this isn't strictly retail development. There might be ancillary retail. So there may well be a degree of sill liability further on. But at this stage, because we're at outline and the sill liability forms, again, they don't determine the acceptability of the scheme. That will come later. So again, officers can't necessarily categorically confirm the amount or whether liability is required. But again, we are governed by the sill regime and what types of development are liable, but that wouldn't necessarily make the development acceptable or unacceptable. Highways colleagues would have looked at it in detail, and if there are any highway improvements or infrastructure requirements due to this development, they would be required at this point in time, which then, so they were the 2 points I just wanted to make members aware. Oh, yeah, and then obviously the amendment to condition 1 at the beginning that was mentioned in the presentation, which was the wording of the reserve matters.
Thank you. So I will now ask, is any member of the committee prepared to propose that we approve this application? A resoundingly ominous silence.
Yeah.
Andrew, is that an official?
Yeah, yes, it is. Yes, it is. And after very, very careful consideration, because it's a complex application, and it's one which has greatly exercised all of us, I think. Before I come to the reasons for my recommendation, for approval, I think it's clear and it's acknowledged. It was acknowledged from the outset in the report that this application does conflict with a number of local and national planning policies. It clearly is a site that's, I would say, well beyond the development limits and is completely surrounded, by countryside. It's not adjacent in any sense, to existing development sites. One of the things which I've mulled over very, very carefully, is the extent to which harms, and I think that there are multiple harms involved with this application, but the extent to which those harms can be satisfactorily mitigated, and the extent to which the benefits, which are principally, in terms of employment, possibly solely, in terms of employment, significantly outweigh those harms. And I've come to the conclusion, trying to weigh up, all of these different considerations, that in this instance, I do feel that the benefits would outweigh the harms, and that is why I'm prepared to propose that we accept this application.
Andrew, thank you. I'm going to ask, by all means, Wayne, please do, but I'm just conscious of time.
No, I just don't want Andrew to go out on a limb with regards to the settlement boundary, because if you were looking at that, it is adjacent to the settlement. It's enclosed in the settlement. I think, I'm not saying that you're wrong, Brian, but I think we were slightly misled by when one was referring to the strategic development area and the Arborfield area, but Greenwoods Lane must be in the settlement boundary. Yeah, please.
To jump in, I think there's a distinction here between a policy designation of what is a settlement, and in Wokingham Borough we call them major development locations, limited development locations.
Yeah.
Defined policy boundaries for urban areas, and what is built up. What you're referring to there is a loose settlement of houses. It's not a settlement in terms of a policy designation. It's still open countryside from a policy perspective, but it is a nucleated group of buildings with people living in them.
You know, I mean, I'm very used to, that's my ward is a limited development area, but every house in my ward sits within the development area. They're very oddly drawn, Brian. I mean, if I were to show you the one for Hurst, you would say, how on earth did somebody come up with that drawing? And it doglegs round fields, etc., because it's evolved over time. I still go back to the point of saying this will be in there, but I just didn't want you thinking that you were 2 miles away from a settlement boundary.
I will be very careful about going on setting precedent in that area, because there's large areas of countryside that are countryside even though they've got houses on them. By our planning policy map, but I take your point, Wayne, and thank you for that. So after 10 minutes of ado, we've got someone who's proposed the motion, which is excellent. Do we have someone who's prepared to second it? Tony?
Yeah, I go along with what Andrew was saying. I think it's finely balanced. There's a lot of rules broken here, the planning things, but on balance, I think the area there, having visited it, it seems a sensible thing to do with that plot, and there's not much more we would do. I'm happy to second that, and I think on balance, because it's the employment as well for those grounds, I think it's worth supporting.
Thank you. In that case, we have a motion before us, which is proposed and seconded. Can I ask those in favour of approving this application to please show so? That is a unanimous decision of the committee. Thank you very much, everybody, for an interesting discussion, which I think we all agree was extremely finely balanced and not an easy conclusion to come to. Right, we now move to agenda item 43, which is application 231809, and I have Kieran Norman to present. Thank you.
Just give us 2 minutes there, Chair, to set up. That'd be great.
Thank you, Chair.
Yep.
Lovely. So this is application 231809 for Unit 34 of Sutton's Business Park. I won't read out the entire description as it is quite wordy, but I'll give you a quick summary. So this application proposes a change of use of the site to add use class B8. So the current mix of uses permitted, which is classes E and B2. So to facilitate this change of use, a number of physical alterations are proposed, including the extension of the yard area, new boundary fencing, 286 solar panels, plus changes to the elevations of the main unit. So the application site is located on the northern edge of Sutton's Business Park, which is a core employment area as defined by policy CP15 of the core strategy and TB11 of the NDD. The site is accessed from a private road that connects to Sutton's Park Avenue to the immediate south. The proposals involve development associated with business, industry and warehousing within a core employment area and are therefore supported in principle by the policies previously mentioned. Overall, subject to the conditions outlined in Appendix 1, the proposals are considered in keeping with the character of the area and would have no detrimental impacts on the amenities of surrounding occupiers or any other material considerations. The application is therefore recommended for approval.
Yeah, thank you very much. Do any members of the committee have any questions on this application? No? In which case we're on the unusual. Anyway, yeah. I should restrain my comments. Would someone like to propose that we accept this application or approve this application? proposal be approved. Someone to second? Wayne, thank you. Those in favour? It's unanimous. Thank you very much. That's the way to do it. Yeah, thank you. We're now going to move to item 44, where I will hand over chair of the meeting to Councillor Mickleborough. Just before I depart, can I say that although this is the last item on the formal agenda, there's another matter that I'd like all committee members to discuss at the close of the meeting. So I will now hand over the chair to Andrew and draw. Thank you.
Right. Good evening, James. If you'd like to begin your presentation.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. Can I just confirm that everyone can hear me?
Thank you. Yes.
Great, thank you. The site address for this application is 206 9 Mile Ride, Finchampstead. The application seeks permission for the erection of a detached dwelling and outbuilding following the demolition of the existing property and detached garage. As you can see from the screen, the existing property is a moderately sized 3-bedroom bungalow. The site has a private garden to the rear of the property and driveway parking to the front. This is the location plan and an aerial image of the site, providing further context to the surrounding area. And here are some street scene images of the immediate street scene. So now I'll just take you through the proposed plans quickly. This is the proposed site layout, showing the new dwelling, outbuilding and parking layout. This is the design of the dwelling from the front and rear of the building. Here is the elevations from the sides. And here are the proposed elevations of the outbuilding. The application site is within settlement limits, and as such, the development is acceptable in principle, subject to compliance with the wider objectives of the development plan documents. The outbuilding would be limited in size and located to the rear of the site. As such, it would have minimal bearing on the wider character of the area. With regard to the dwelling itself, a prominent objection made in the representations received referred to the 3-storey nature of the dwelling. However, visually, the design gives off the impression of a 2-storey property with a loft conversion. In terms of building heights, the replacement dwelling would be approximately 1.75 metres taller than the existing bungalow. However, the maximum height would not be too dissimilar to other properties in 9 Mile Ride. Overall, the design of the dwelling is not considered to harm the appearance of 9 Mile Ride, which itself is characterised by a mixture of housing types, designs and styles. There are 2 side windows on the first floor, however these serve non-habitable rooms and therefore would not impact the privacy of adjacent residents. Furthermore, the separation distances that would be present between the replacement dwelling and the nearest habitable rooms of the neighbouring properties would prevent any harmful loss of light or overbearing impact. There were no highways, environmental health or drainage objections. The Trees and Landscape Officer did request the submission of an arboricultural impact assessment. However, due to the context of the site, where there are no protected trees, this was considered unnecessary. In summary, the application is recommended for approval, subject to the conditions listed in the officer report. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Next, I'd like to invite Roger Marshall-Say from Finchampstead Parish Council. Good evening, Roger. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Finchampstead Parish Council objects to this application. But I would like to emphasise that we don't object at all to the development of this site. It's got an existing bungalow on it, and the intention is to replace that bungalow with an alternative accommodation. Our objection centres around the bulk, the overbearing manner of the building, and in particular, the fact that it contravenes the new neighbourhood development plan that Finch Hampstead has just been adopted. It took 5 years to put the plan together. The referendum to agree to it was held on the 7th of September, and we had just on 90% of our residents voted in favour of the plan. It has many policies, but policy D1 relates to building heights. I quote from the plan: building heights should reflect the character and appearance of the parish. The development of 3-storey and above housing will generally only be supported within the area of the Strategic Development Application, SDL, and the Gorse Ride Regeneration Area. Now, this site is well removed from both of those 2 exceptions. This is the first planning application that has come forward since the plan has been adopted. And it's perhaps worth quoting from the press release that Woking Borough Council put out about the plan being released, or the plan being accepted by the council. The plan now forms part of the statutory development plan for the area. It will be used as a starting point for determining planning applications in Finch Hampstead Parish alongside the council's adopted local plan. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this is the first time we have had a planning application that contravenes the neighbourhood development plan with regard to the building of 3-bedroom, 3-storey buildings within Finch Hampstead. And after all the effort and the numbers of people who voted in favour of the plan, for it to be largely ignored.
Excuse me, Mr. Marshall, I'm afraid your time is up. Could you summarise in just one final sentence?
I'll just finish
Thank
anyway.
you.
It would be a real blow, I think, if the first instance of the plan being applied, it will be ignored. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, may I ask Pauline Granger to address the committee. Good evening, Pauline, and thank you for attending this evening. Yeah, just press the button at the front. That's it. Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. This planning application contravenes 2 policies, D1 and D2, in the Finch Hampstead Neighbourhood Plan and seriously impacts my property in respect of various WBC considerations for planning applications. On the back of the proposed house, the windows on the first floor will overlook some of our garden, no problem, but the dormer windows on the second floor will deprive us of all privacy in the garden, a total loss of our residential amenity. The higher you go, the greater the view, and to suggest it's only an oblique view is derisory. It is a total loss of privacy. The scale of the 3-storey dwelling will overshadow our property and reduce the light significantly on our east elevation. Our home is not 2 stories, as the officer states in his report, and this 3-storey house sits beside our single storey containing our living rooms. Our current outlook is a low wall, low roof and sky, and this will be replaced by a wall at least twice as high and a massive roof. Further, the windows on the side will look down into our living rooms, and whilst they're called non-habitable, they are bathrooms, so will certainly be in use. The footprint of the proposed house, because of the single storey protruding at the back and side and the outbuilding, is a large increase on the existing footprint, significantly reducing the size of the garden. This is against design policy in the FNDP, which states the size and nature of domestic gardens varies considerably across the parish, but they all contribute to the greenness of the parish as well as providing habitat for wildlife and other sustainability benefits. It is the intent of the FNDP these should be preserved wherever possible. The site plan dated the 7th of July shows the property sitting 821 centimetres from 204 9 Mile Ride and 1 metre from 206A 9 Mile Ride, and not 1.2 and 1.8 as stated by the officer. So it actually contravenes design principle R16. The revised site plan dated the 27th of October showing a revised driveway does not revise these measurements. The new excavations are likely to disturb the roots of 23-year-old shrubs, hedging and trees along our common boundary just 1 metre from the property. The loss of these shrubs and trees would be to the detriment of the street scene. Thank you.
Thank you, Pauline. And next, I would like to welcome Rebecca.
Thank you, Chair. The recommendation for approval of this planning application by officers goes against core policy in the Finchampstead Neighbourhood Plan and is not in keeping with the street scene or Woking Borough Design Guide. Quite simply, this replacement dwelling replaces a single-storey bungalow with a 3-storey dwelling. Here's the first image of the bungalow. This shows how the new proposal will alter the street scene and cause harm in the neighbouring area by dominating the other properties and being visually out of keeping with the character and not reflect the surrounding area. The surrounding properties are a maximum of 2 stories or of chalet-style bungalows. This proposal goes against the general principles of the Borough Design Guide relating to context and character. The dwelling proposed does not respond positively to the existing context or relate well to neighbours. In an email, planning officers have identified that this is a 3-storey dwelling and that there are no other examples of 3-storey dwellings within the immediate street scene. The Finchampstead Neighbourhood Development Plan was formally adopted in September. The FNDP Design Policy D1 states that building height should reflect the character and appearance of the parish. Could you put the other images on for me, please? There's some other to show. From the photographs shown, it is clear that this proposal does not meet this policy. Policy D1 also states that the development of 3-storey housing will generally only be supported within the area of the SDL. The site of this proposal does not fall within the SDL. Policy D2 outlines the preservation of the rural character of the parish. Point 1 states that structures will be viewed against existing built form and wherever possible, development should deliver enhancements to the landscape character. I would argue that this proposal does not achieve these objectives in any shape or form. The 3-storey nature of this property will dominate the neighbouring properties and will not deliver any enhancements to the landscape character. Policy D3 states that whilst the FNDP does encourage innovation in design, this needs to be sympathetic to and complement existing styles. This proposal does not complement any of the existing styles in the immediate area, as can be seen by the photographs I've shown you, and there are no 3-storey properties. To be clear, it was fully anticipated that this site would be developed and a planning application was expected by neighbours. The dominating style and design of the proposed property was not expected, and we are absolutely dismayed that officers are recommending this for approval. I would urge the committee to look at all the aspects and concerns that I, the Parish Council and residents have raised and refuse this application. If you have any doubts, I urge the committee to complete a site visit and see for themselves how this proposal would be detrimental and cause harm. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Okay, could members wishing to ask questions please indicate? So Wayne, Michael, Al, Tony. I think that's a very good start. Thank you very much. Okay, so Wayne, thank you.
Yeah, Madeline sent out the pictures yesterday and James referred to them earlier, but one of the things, and Rebecca has confirmed, it was very difficult to understand the relationship of this property and the surrounding properties by what was sent out in the site photos. I've now got a better picture of that by what I've seen this evening. And I think it's very, very difficult for us. And I wish that we'd had gone on a site visit before this evening, but that's it. We haven't. But I would very much like to see this site in the flesh, because it from what I've seen so far, apart from what we've seen this evening, was very difficult to tell the size and scale of this property to the adjacent properties. But what's clear, I don't know where the 1.9 meters comes from, because when you look at that picture that Rebecca showed earlier, and then you look in the plans, that looks a lot more than 1.9 meters to me. And also, I would like to see the relationship in the flesh of the two adjoining properties. So I would urge us go on a site visit.
So Wayne, is that a formal proposal? Right. Is there anybody who would wish to speak against Wayne's proposal for a site visit? Okay, would anybody like to second Wayne's proposal? Michael? Okay. So we have a proposal that's been seconded. Okay. All of those in favour of deferring this application until a site visit is conducted, please raise your hands. Thank you. That is unanimous. Okay. Thank you.
Chair, can I just clarify the reasons, Wayne, if you just wouldn't mind just remind me, it is, as far as I understand it, is to see the relationship of the adjoining properties and their scale in relation to what you've been provided in plan form.
Bulk, scale, massing, streets.
Thanks, that's great, thank you.
you.